Welcome friends to episode 5 of the Lobby Card, which is basically a mixed bag collection of recent film reviews from this channel. And tonight we have resurrected kung fu heroes, we have the apocalypse in Canada, we have rural Wisconsin cannibals, we have killer irradiated bats, and to top it off we have a little collective PTSD, a little collective trauma from 2020. So grab your favourite refreshment or snack and lean back in that easy chair as we take a look at our first review. Exploitation was a fascinating subgenre that sprung up in the 1970s following the death by misadventure of the founder of Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee. And this is certainly one of the strangest and one of the most entertaining of these Lee-alike epics. So the movie begins with a bizarre yet amazing tacked-on prologue where Bruce, or at least a Lee-alike stand-in, bursts out of his Seattle grave after it's struck by lightning. It's quite an interesting plot point, kind of like Jason in Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. This one's a little different, a little unique in being South Korean made, and it does star South Korean Taekwondo instructor Jun Chong, credited as Bruce Lee. That's Leah, L-E-A, not L-E-E. And it's rumoured to be directed by Umberto Lenzi of Nightmare City and Eaten Alive fame. And I like to think that it was, even if it wasn't. It adds to the mystique. So the tacked-on prologue has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the movie, which is a little bit disappointing. But the premise of Bruce Lee Fights Back from the Grave is that Korean man Wong Han is trying to find out who killed his brother. Because of course he is. That's usually the main plot point of all these movies. So he travels to Los Angeles and he teams up with a lady called Suzanne to try and unravel the whole mystery. So I guess you'd say it's a bit thin on plot, but it is big on entertainment value. It is something of an oddity to say the least and comes highly recommended, especially to fans of the Lee-alikes. And the tasteless opening sequence of Bruce leaping from the grave in a flurry of lightning and 1-inch punches was of course added by the US distributors. And lead actor Jun Chong is enjoyably naive as Wong Han, and he probably would have been disappointed if he'd known that his movie was co-opted and turned into a Lee-alike movie. The rest of the cast, however, is uniformly awful, but that's okay. This movie's delightfully entertaining and has some great dialogue and some mediocre kung fu, or is that Taekwondo? Sort of the opposite of the actual Bruce Lee movies, really, which generally had awful dialogue but amazing kung fu. So Bruce Lee fights back from the grave and make a pretty cool double bill with Soul Brothers of Kung Fu. And I reckon something nice to enjoy with this one being a South Korean production. You really couldn't go too far wrong with some nice tasty South Korean fried chicken, washed down with some ice cold Cass beer, preferably a long neck of Cass beer. So that, my friends, is Bruce Lee Fights Back from Beyond the Grave, one of the standout oddities of the whole Lee-alike subgenre of Kung Fu, which appeared from the late 70s to the early 80s. A lot of these movies are strange, unusual and bizarre, and Bruce Lee Fights Back from the Grave is no different. And it's also a good example of a completely random movie being re-edited and co-opted by foreign distributors and being turned into something else entirely. Part of me wonders if I saw the original South Korean film, if it'd make a lot more sense. I suspect that it would. But nonetheless, it is quite entertaining to see what these American producers have done to Bruce Lee Fights Back from the Grave with the tacked-on prologue of Bruce leaping from the grave after being struck by lightning, ready to go, ready to kick ass. And it wouldn't be as entertaining without it. And as I said, the lead role, Bruce K. Leah, as he's credited as, also known as Jun Hong, is basically beautifully naive in the movie, or at least the overdub's beautifully naive. He has the usual interactions with Interpol and so on and so forth, and the local goons who look kind of like the village people. And there's all kinds of entertainment to be had in Bruce Lee Fights Back from Beyond the Grave. DEFCON 4 is a military term about nuclear preparedness. And DEFCON 4 is also a highly entertaining post-apocalyptic action movie made in Canada in 1985. So the premise of this little Canadian sci-fi shocker is that we have 3 astronauts orbiting the Earth in a cutting-edge missile defence system. So the missile defence system's kind of like Ronald Reagan's proposed Star Wars system or Donald Trump's proposed Golden Dome system. Except that unlike those, which were probably either about money laundering or hollow political grandstanding, this particular missile defence system is very much operational, just like the Death Star in Star Wars. Our three astronauts are the surly Walker, the sassy Jordan, and our kind of irritating hero Hal. I really don't have any idea how this trio spent so long in space without Walker and Jordan strangling Hal. He's quite whingy at the best of times and even more whingy at the worst of times. But to cut a long story short, nuclear war starts and our heroes perform their duty. Planet Earth is nuked like a TV dinner in a microwave, and a few months later a malfunction sees our trio make an involuntary re-entry in their spaceship. Now, being a post-apocalyptic scenario, of course, nothing goes well from here. We have cannibals, we have a survivalist Scotsman, we have a militia led by an annoying preppy kid, and we have everything else that you'd expect from a dark, bleak, grimy post-apocalyptic film. So DEFCON 4 was one of the high points of 1980s apocalyptic cinema, and one of the high points of 1980s Exploitation. Obviously, it follows a lot of the same beats as a lot of those movies, but it still manages to dance to the beat of its own drum, which is great. The highlight of DEFCON 4 is easily the character called Vinnie McKinnon, who's played by an actor called Maury Chaykin, I think. And this memorable post-apocalyptic survivalist is a dirty old man in more ways than one. Not only does he not wash like most of the characters in this movie, it's a bit of a common theme, but he also has the regressive reptile brain of a schoolboy who just found out about the birds and the bees. So that leads to some awkward interactions with the fairer sex. And Vinny has a compound and armaments that'd make your average doomsday cult green with envy. And he also gets around in a kilt, of course, much like Rowdy Roddy Piper. And he also gets most of the best lines in the movie, just like Rowdy Roddy Piper always did. But most of the actors in this movie do turn in surprisingly good performances. The preppy kid Gideon, for example, does manage to steal every scene that he's in, and he gives a suitably over-the-top performance as a post-apocalyptic dictator. Gideon could also win second prize in a Jan Michael Vincent lookalike contest. And DEFCON 4 is a surprisingly original take on what was by 1985 a genre that was running out of ideas and running out of steam. It certainly tries harder than most of the stock standard Mad Max rip-offs and scores extra points from me for that. And it is a high point in 80s Italian, or 80s Canadian exploitation, sorry. Can't get the Canadians and the Italians mixed up. This movie's quite dark at times, so it might make an interesting double bill with 1982's Battle Truck. And something nice to enjoy with this Canadian genre film might be a steaming bowl of poutine washed down with some ice-cold kokanee. So that, my friends, is DEFCON 4 from 1985. You might be familiar with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, loosely based on the exploits of serial killer Ed Gein. But not everyone's aware that a more accurate and superior portrayal made it into theatres the very same year. So 1974's Deranged is an effective little Canadian-made shocker starring Roberts Blossom, best remembered as the scary old man in Home Alone. So the premise of this one closely follows the real-life narrative of Wisconsin ghoul Ed Gein, and it's remarkably faithful to the real-life American horror story. Ezra Cobb is a simple country boy with a domineering bedridden mother who preaches fire and brimstone to the poor impressionable lad when she isn't keeping him busy with the day-to-day running of the farm. So Ezra's mum is quite the religious zealot, to say the least, and she warns her son against getting romantically involved with the fairer sex. Mama might be bedridden, but she's pretty feisty nonetheless, and she constantly offers pearls of wisdom like the wages of sin being syphilis and gonorrhea. It's quite the community service announcement from Mama, to say the least. So needless to say, Mama's done a bit of a number on her only child Ezra, really rewired his brain, and a feeble brain it is. And even though he's middle-aged, he's still the quintessential mama's boy in this movie. His mother's his entire world. All poor Ezra does is look after Mama, tend to the farm, and do the odd job around town for a bit of extra money. So one day Mama dies in bed after regurgitating a heap of blood while Ezra's feeding her soup and watching helplessly by her side. And this causes poor Ezra to have a bit of a psychotic break, and he descends into a personal madness of grave robbing and murder that'll shock his rural farming community to the core. So Deranged, much like Psycho or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is of course based upon the stranger-than-fiction real-life story of the Wisconsin ghoul Ed Gein. And Roberts Blossom's pretty amazing as the pinhead par excellence, Ezra Cobb. He doesn't just play this role by any means, he also inhabits it, quite like Joaquin Phoenix or Daniel Day-Lewis. So he inhabits the role of the eccentric Ezra Cobb in a performance that transcends everything you'd expect from a low-budget Canadian horror film. So Ezra has a ton of great lines in the movie, which make Deranged just as successful as a black comedy. Dark gallows humour as an effective little chiller. And at one point, one character's talking about carnal pleasures, and Ezra excitedly gasps, "Carnival?" He's no doubt excited about the prospect of dodgem cars, Ferris wheels, and fairy floss. So Deranged is full of quotable lines. Tonally, it's a blend of highly effective black comedy, gallows humour, and grimy atmospheric horror. The whole thing feels cold and wintry and ominous, and really does need those slivers of comic relief to get you through the movie. So this is a cracker of a movie, easily one of the most effective horror movies of the 70s, one of the unsung horror movies of the 70s. Personally, I consider it to be a better film than Psycho or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when it comes to movies inspired by this same true crime story of Ed Gein. And Roberts Blossom's remarkable as Ezra Cobb. He steals every scene he appears in, and of course he has all the best lines, as you'd expect. And I reckon Deranged would probably make a perfect double bill with Bloodsucking Freaks, which is similarly dark, gallows humour, shocking, all the rest. And something nice to enjoy with this one might be a nice Cobb salad, because you don't really want to be eating barbecue or anything like that while watching Deranged. And you might want to wash it down with a Brandy Alexander, which I think I recall Ezra ordering at a bar in one scene, because he doesn't really drink. So that, my friends, is Deranged. A lot of social commentary in this one, mainly about loneliness and social isolation. Ezra's mum is his entire world, and he doesn't know what to do without her, has no connection to the outside world, like a lot of people these days, with people living online and so on and so forth. So Deranged, even though it was made in a pre-internet era, it does have a lot of the same, cover a lot of the same issues of the epidemic of loneliness, detachment from reality, and all of the other issues that seem to plague us in these troubled times. And Ezra's worldview is formed by his mother. She also sort of tethers him to an extent to what little reality he or her are experiencing alone on the farm together. They have no connection to the outside world, no connection to wider morality or anything like that. Ezra's mama has her own sort of stringent morality that she really drums into her son, beats into her son, and that's all he's ever known. So it really is little wonder that Ezra didn't really have much of a hope of not becoming a psychotic serial killer, I guess. So he's very much seems to be a case of nurture rather than nature, although nature played a little bit of a role being so isolated, I guess. So as I said, that is Deranged from 1974. It's probably my favourite movie based on the real-life exploits of Ed Gein. There is, of course, Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and there's been multiple different biopics varying in accuracy and quality. But this one's probably the pick of the litter, purely for Roberts Blossom's wonderful performance as the very feeble-minded, very disturbed Ezra Cobb. And fairly easy to find if you're looking to watch it. It's fairly widely available on streaming services and things like that, physical media. And incidentally, the story's being remade once again by Ryan Murphy for Netflix as part of his, his serial killer series. So he's making a Netflix series about Ed Gein, which premieres fairly soon. And that'll be quite interesting, but I highly doubt that it will surpass Deranged as the premier adaptation of this very dark true crime story. I love a good post-apocalyptic movie, and I love a good nature strikes back, nature run amok, or ecological horror movie. And what do you get when you blend these two genres? Well, for me personally, that's about as sublime as beer and fried chicken. The premise of Chosen Survivors from 1974 is that a group of people are selected at random for a place in an underground fallout shelter on the eve of a nuclear war. So it's kind of like a doomsday version of Big Brother or something like that. It doesn't really seem to be that random. Most of them really seem rather influential in one way or another. They're either famous businessmen or famous athletes or whatever. And they all make it down the elevator and inside just in time before the proverbial hits the fan. So while everyone else gets irradiated and turned to dust, our lucky post-apocalyptic lottery winners are safe. Or are they? It turns out that the facility and the adjoining caves are also home to hundreds of bloodthirsty vampire bats, intent on draining our chosen survivors of every last drop of their blood. So, is Chosen Survivors as exciting or as interesting as the premise promises? Well, not really. The threat of vampire bats really does seem a little bit underwhelming at the best of times. It might have been more interesting and satisfying if the bats were mutated and or a little bigger or something like that. Really anything other than average size vampire bats. Nevertheless, this is one of those fairly cosy comfort horror movies, so it still has its charms, limited as they might be. It isn't really the most plausible scenario in terms of any of the establishing plot points. But if you're willing to overlook all of that, you might have a decent enough time with Chosen Survivors. Chosen Survivors does have enough of a claustrophobic feel and somewhat interesting and novel a premise to warrant a viewing, even if only out of curiosity. It'd make a fun little double bill with Phase 4, I reckon. And something nice to enjoy with this one might be a classic Bloody Mary, just to get into the vampire bat spirit. And that, my friends, is Chosen Survivors. So this one is brimming with social commentary. Like Jurassic Park, it really teaches us that life does find a way, regardless of how much technology you put in place. And also it tells us and teaches us that regardless of how many safety measures that we put in place, if it's your time to go, it's your time to go. These people are in this underground facility and they still aren't safe from these bloodthirsty vampire bats. So, like all of these nature run amok movies, these nature strikes back movies, generally the themes are always that nature does find a way, and that's very much the case in Chosen Survivors. So the bats do end up getting through all of this security and attacking all of these influential people. So the ending of this one does have a bit of a twist, which I won't go into if you're interested in seeing it. If not, you can always go and Google it or ChatGPT it to find out the end, but it does end in a different way than you might suspect. So that is Chosen Survivors, the post-apocalyptic killer bat movie. Eddington is a southwestern neo-gothic thriller, and I reckon it's the first movie I've seen to objectively dissect the collective madness that was 2020. And the plot of Eddington's a bit difficult to go through without a lot of spoilers. Basically, it's set during the early days of lockdowns in the tiny one-horse town of Eddington, New Mexico. And the local sheriff keeps locking horns with many of the townsfolk and the local mayor, no less. And he sees all of the various lockdown restrictions as a bit over the top, a bit much, a little bit crazy, and you kind of can't blame him for thinking that in retrospect. And others in town, including the mayor, think that the sheriff's completely lost his mind, as was the case at the time. I mean, it's not like taking all these precautions and controlling the spread over 2 weeks is going to do far more damage than the virus itself now, is it? So the sheriff, played by Joaquin Phoenix, and the mayor, played by Pedro Pascal, lock horns, as it were, following a bit of a tense maskless versus mask exchange in the local supermarket, which is something we all saw a bit of. And in a moment of despair and frustration, the sheriff decides to run for mayor. So this is the catalyst for a series of events that'll inevitably end in violence and mayhem, of course, being an A24 movie. Because, of course, Eddington is the latest release from A24 Studios. So A24 is fairly unique in becoming a bit of a trusted brand of sorts over the years for fans of offbeat cinema, to such an extent that the A24 logo is usually a bigger attraction for people like myself than the title, genre or premise of the movie. That said, Eddington isn't going to be for everyone, or even everyone who likes A24 movies. As a premise and in the way it's executed, this one's going to be as divisive as the pandemic was itself. But for me, it did work in spades. So this is the perfect celluloid snapshot of the collective madness that was 2020, the madness of crowds, as it were. I don't care what ideology you carried like baggage during that time, whether you were left, right or apolitical. I think every one of us was unhinged or acting completely irrationally to some extent during that time. Only the level of irrationality varied, really. And if you think that you were completely rational throughout 2020, completely unaffected, completely sane during that whole time, frankly, I think you're probably lying to yourself. I think we all lost it at least a little bit to some extent, and sadly a few of us never quite came back from it all yet. So Eddington, the movie, captures that zeitgeist perfectly, the zeitgeist of 2020. Its cup is overflowing with social commentary. It's all about the madness of crowds, the viral effects of blind ideology, whether it's rampant progressive self-loathing wokeness or conservatives obsessing about a sound of freedom and whatnot. So COVID in this film's a strong metaphor for the pandemic of radicalised politicisation in Eddington, just as it has been in real life. And as I said, this is going to be a very divisive movie. You're either going to love it, be greatly affected by it, or walk out of the theatre halfway through, which is what seems to be happening. And it'll probably dredge up quite a bit of 2020 PTSD for most people who see it. Even the critics seem to be divided on this one, and clearly it's the critics who are most ideologically captured or lacking in the ability for any kind of mature introspection or any kind of tolerance for alternate worldviews who are hating this movie the most. Eddington's really the first film to take a mature, apolitical and introspective look at the madness of 2020, and that was always going to enrage the more tribal people among us, and they're going to hate the movie, but it may well be the most important movie of 2025, purely because it does function as a kind of cathartic experience in terms of processing and moving past the collective trauma that was 2020. And even though it's more of a character-driven southwestern gothic thriller, there's a surprising amount of gore to placate the average A24 horror fan out there. And I reckon this movie would make a pretty good solid double bill with No Country for Old Men or even Fargo. And something nice to enjoy with this one might be a nice New Mexican green chili stew and an icy cold cerveza. So that, my friends, is Eddington, directed by Ari Aster, and it's the first of his films I've seen. I'd be keen to check out the others or hear your thoughts on the others in the comments. As I said, this is going to be an incredibly divisive film, but it is, I feel, one of the more important films for 2025. It'll hopefully allow some people to move on from 2020, which is good for everyone, and learn our lessons, learn a little bit more about tolerating alternate worldviews, because I don't think it matters which side of the political spectrum people fell on during that time. We did see quite a bit of intolerance on both sides. So it's something we can all learn from seeing a movie like Eddington by such an open-minded director who's so apolitical, which is a nice, refreshing change. So that last few review is probably a bit timely, to say the least, with the crazy recent events and everyone falling into ideological echo chambers. Hopefully next episode will be a bit lighter, I guess. But if you are still here, thanks for joining me here on the lobby card. If it's your first time and you enjoyed this episode, I hope to see you again. If you're returning and you enjoyed this episode, then I'd strongly suggest liking, sharing and subscribing so you don't miss the next one. And otherwise, I'm off to enjoy the rest of my day. Take care, and look forward to seeing you next time.